Hi, my name's Ethan, and today I'm going to be showing you Pollify. Pollify is a daily poll app. First, we should visit the website at pollify.xyz. However, for this presentation, I'll be using localhost. You can see there's a place to vote and a place to leave comments. If we try to vote, we're redirected to the login page. I'll go ahead and log in with this account. When I first log in, I have to fill out some information about myself. Let's do that. Now, you can see I can leave comments. Let's go ahead and vote. I'll vote for Emacs. If I wanted to, I could change my vote to Vim, but I'll leave it at Emacs. I can also vote for tomorrow's poll. Let's go ahead and leave a comment. You can see my comment has appeared here. If I visit the account page, I can see all of our previous polls. I can also see the demographic data associated with those polls. We're going to update this UI in the coming days. Finally, if you visit the About page, you can learn more about us. Now, I'm going to pass it off to Julia to talk about our design.
Hi, I'm Julia, and for this project, I focused on web design and front-end development. For our web application, we had considered a few other ideas before finally deciding on creating an app centered around daily polls. Our goals were to implement a simple daily poll app where users can create an account and view their profile, vote and comment on polls, suggest future poll ideas, and view their past poll histories as well as demographics. Using Figma, I created wireframes and prototypes for the layout of our web app, aiming to make it as minimal and user-friendly as possible. I designed the app to be mainly focused on one single page, the homepage that contains the main poll, comment section, and poll suggestion functionality. Through the design of the front page, the results are visually displayed to the user in a clean, digestible manner after voting. The poll buttons themselves transform into a diagram that displays the percentage of votes for each option. To implement the comments functionality, I placed the comments section to the right of the main page so that it's easily accessible to the user if they want to view comments or suggest one of their own. The option to vote on future polls or suggest a new poll idea is implemented through a pop-up that is normally hidden unless clicked, as it's a minor feature of the page. With one single main color throughout the web app, I kept the design as clean and simple as possible while highlighting the most important parts of our application. Moving on to the profile page, our goal was to allow the user to search through the past data and view their voting histories as well as past comments. I designed the profile page to include a simple calendar that allows the user to select which dates poll results and comments to be displayed, making it easier for the user to switch between multiple dates or even go far back in time. My initial designs also included account creation and login pages with the option of making the pop-ups on the home page, but we later switched to using an external system of Google OAuth for maintaining user accounts. After finishing up the prototypes of our web application in Figma, we began implementing the designs on the front end using React, which Arik will now discuss.
Hi everyone, this is Der-Sarkissian. I mainly worked on front-end development in this project. As you guys already saw, you have a general idea of how the design of our website works. Now, let's show you how we implemented it. The very first thing to note is that this website is built with React. However, instead of just using JavaScript, we opted into using TypeScript. The main difference in TypeScript over JavaScript is it gives us control of the types in terms of the variables being used. So instead of allowing JavaScript to automatically determine the type of variable, simply dependent on what we give it as a value, TypeScript allows us to have a dependable and consistent value, a consistent type for each variable. We didn't use it to its full extent. However, when it came to passing properties and some components, it actually ended up being very useful. So overall, we decided to stick with it. When it comes to the different libraries that we used within our platform, Some of the more user-facing libraries included things like React Router. React Router allowed us to have dynamic URLs within the website with little to no configuration. It made it really simple for us. Styled components, which gives us a lot of CSS features, things like animations, making our buttons look nice. It was definitely very useful. And finally, React Calendar, which is what we use to show previous polls on the account page. When it came to connecting the React frontend to the backend, we found that we needed a single source for the state, mainly because all the components needed to access the same data at the same time, whether or not you were logged in. And we found that React Redux was the best choice. React Redux essentially allows us to have one single source of truth. There is one state for the overall application, and everything is updated through the Redux store. Now, in order to make asynchronous calls, so calls that weren't happening at the same point as everything else on React and making those calls to the API, we needed a middleware called Redux, and for Redux called Thunk, and Thunk allowed us to connect to our backend, which was managed by Aws Amplify. And in order to connect to Aws Amplify, we used Amplify's JS library. So to kind of go over how the structure of the website looks like, we have our main app.tsx file. App.tsx manages the majority of the flow of the website. We built the entire website using Create React App, and we just sort of added on from there. We have our reducer functions. All of our reducers are in here, along with all the actions, and they're all included on index.ts. And then we have individual different components, such as the About page, comment component, header component, lots of different components here. So to explain a little more about the backend, I'm now going to pass it to my friend Narek.
Hey guys, my name is Narek, and I wanted to give you guys a quick overview of our backend. So I'm going to start here on our website's homepage, and you can see whenever I respond to one of these polls, it's going to create a post request to our backend. And so we're hosting that backend, or the API at least, on something called API Gateway, which is creating this polls endpoint. And whenever it receives a request, it's actually forwarding that over to a Lambda function we have that is running Node.js. So you can see the source code here. Whenever we want to respond to one of these polls, it's going to call this function here. And in short, what this does is it chooses that response and it updates the database. So the database that we're using is something called DynamoDB, and this is a NoSQL database. And the main thing we're storing here is the polls for each day. So you can see when I go to view one of these polls, we have the question here, along with the responses, along with the results of that poll. The next thing we're storing in our database is the suggestions for the next day. So it has a lot of the similar information here. Next, there's this function we have written called nextPollChooser. And this is a Lambda function that's being run on a schedule at midnight every night. And if we look at the source code, we can understand what it does. Its purpose is mainly to get the list of the suggested polls, choose the winner, and make that into next day's active poll, along with some other stuff. Next, I wanted to talk a little bit about authentication. So we're using something called Cognito, and this is what we're using to make sure our users are logged in. And it's also what we're using for user attributes, such as the age here. And we use this stuff for demographics. Lastly, we're using something called Aws Amplify. And this is a service that kind of ties in all of these various AWS services, and it lets us configure them and deploy them with one button. And so you can see here, if I go to the console, we have the front-end environment, which is being deployed from the GitHub, along with the back-end environment, which we can deploy. So this has been a quick rundown of our backend, and next up, Hannah is going to talk a little bit about challenges we faced while building this app, along with some future plans. Thank you, guys.
Hey guys, I'm Hannah, and I'm going to talk about challenges we ran into, our future plans, and what we learned. So some of the challenges we ran into were that we had time zone differences between the backend and the React Calendar component. So React Calendar actually returns the selected date in Pacific time, but our backend expected UTC time, so we had to do some manual conversions to solve this, which wasn't ideal. Additionally, we ran into some challenges with reconciling data flow between the front end and the back end. So the way it should work is that data flows from the database to the back end. Then the front end has to call the back end for information from the database. It will then display the information to the user. It can also interact with the user and send that information to the backends. After that, the backend will then process the data and will modify the database. We ended up using Redux to store information from the backend and the front end, and we thought it was best to use Redux with Thunk so that we can easily communicate with the backend. Additionally, we struggled a little bit to find the best practice in making a Redux action call to the backend and then have that response update the state. So we thought that we needed a more standardized process to do that. Some of our plans for the future include implementing more demographic information, for example, the locations of users, and we would also want to improve the user interface for this. And we'd also want to improve our mobile friendliness and responsive components. We already have some media queries for iPhones, but we want to expand this to iPads and larger monitors. Lastly, we learned, by working on this project, we learned how to work with a group of other people. We learned how to use version control so that we don't mess up any of our code. And we basically learned the ins and outs of building an application from start to finish. So go to pollify.xyz and vote now.